Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest live episode of The Free Marketeers. My name is Chris, here at the FMF offices in Johannesburg. Today, I'm joined by Daniël Eloff. Daniel, how are you today?
Hello, Chris. Fine, thanks, and you. Lovely to be here.
Pleasure to have you. We're going to talk about your experiences at the State Capture Commission, state capture in general, what that was all about, and we'll also discuss some of the implications of the commission for South Africa going forward. I mean, the last week we've seen the rule of law. From some quarters, people say the rule of law has been held strongly. Other quarters, people say the rule of law has already been undermined up to this point, and we've seen the manifestation of this and various other factors around us now with some of the looting and violence going on. But we'll get into all of that. For those of you who don't know Daniël, he is a partner at the law firm Herter Spies, which specializes in public interest and civil rights litigation. He also teaches commercial law and business ethics at Academia. And Daniël co-hosts the Afrikaans podcast Politiek and is a senior writer at the Rational Standard. I have linked to the Politiek YouTube channel in the description. I recommend that you all go and check them out and subscribe to them. I'll also link to his Twitter profile in due course. So Daniël, just to start off with, tell us a little bit about the State Capture Commission. I mean, state capture is obviously linked to the years that former President Jacob Zuma was in power, endemic looting and corruption of state resources, state agencies, the hollowing out of capacities and abilities of the people who used to be there, agencies such as the Revenue Service and others. So tell us a little bit about the commission and what its mission is, as it were.
So the State Capture Commission, for those who aren't aware, is basically a commission of inquiry set up by President Cyril Ramaphosa to investigate state corruption, in essence, during the past nearly a decade. What's quite interesting is it's been going on, or dragging on at least, for roughly 3 years, and it focuses on alleged corruption in a bunch of state-owned enterprises. So we're talking about Prasa, Transnet, South African Airways, all Eskom, all these entities that were quite rife with corruption during the past 10 years. Probably some of them still quite corrupt at the moment. And how I view the commission is basically through two lenses, the one being a practical lens and the other sort of a symbolic lens, because I think in a practical sense, it provides the opportunity for some type or form of lawfare. On the other hand, you then, at least in the symbolic sense, you have the opportunity for South Africa to sort of try to deal with the corruption that it witnessed during the past decade. So that's the one part of the symbolic, or at least symbolic lens of viewing the State Capture Commission. I also, to a certain extent, view the State Capture Commission as an attempt to, I almost want to call it, talk about state sin and to address state sin. It's a opportunity to try to cleanse South Africa of the sin without actually really holding people to account. And I think that's the major concern, is the State Capture Commission, although it has lofty goals and it has a good ideal, it in the end it boils down to circumventing the justice system. In the end, these people who are alleged to have been involved in corrupt activity should have been brought to account through the already established criminal law means that South Africa has. But we realize that this is sort of a compromise between trying to hold people to account without actually really holding people to account. So it's been quite interesting the past 3 years. There have been revelations that have shocked South Africa. There have been revelations that we were aware of, but sort of not aware of the entire scope of the deeds. And here we sit 3 years later, and the commission has asked for another extension of about 3 months to finalize the commission's hearings and the commission's report. That report will then be submitted by the chair of the commission, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, who will then send it to President Ramaphosa. And after President Ramaphosa has had a look at the report, he'll then decide whether or not he'll release it, how he'll release it, and to what extent he'll release it in the end. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, the State Capture Commission, and a bit of my own 2 cents on how I view it.
I wonder whether the president will be shocked at any of the revelations in the report, but let's see what happens. I wanted to ask, obviously, about why you were in front of the commission. I'm assuming it's not because of allegations of corruption, but I mean, this is a platform for you to sort of talk about what was the context of you going there. It's interesting to find out the different ways and organizations which have been in front of the Chief Justice and have used the platform, as it were, to try and, I mean, in some ways, South Africans, despite everything else going on, one can say that many South Africans care very, very deeply about the country, and they want to use all the different avenues, legal avenues that they have, to try and at least talk about some of the issues that have happened the last few years and try and fix those. So tell us a little bit about why you were at the commission.
So if I'm brutally honest, it was a bit. What would you call it? We stretched our luck a bit, trying to get before the Zondo Commission. We applied to the commission on behalf of AfriForum, and the application was to be allowed leave to formally cross-examine President Ramaphosa, specifically on the topics of his involvement as the ANC's head of cadre deployment during these years. And because what our client felt is, although a lot was asked and a lot was said about the SOE's involvement in state corruption, not a lot of focus was put on our current president's role in putting these key people in place, in the places of power within the state-owned enterprises. And we wanted to highlight his involvement in that regard. But we knew that it would be a difficult task to get before the Zondo Commission, because generally organizations that aren't directly implicated, or people or individuals who aren't directly implicated, aren't allowed the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses. And we were aware of this fact. We knew that this would happen. However, we at our firm, at least, we're quite accustomed to sort of unorthodox approaches to law and some legal gymnastics. And I think we got quite a decent application and a good affidavit before the commission. And even though we weren't, in the end of the day, allowed the opportunity to cross-examine President Ramaphosa, we did have the opportunity to stand up before the commission and basically lay out our concerns and to highlight what we wanted to highlight in any case through the cross-examination. So that was obviously quite good. And the second sort of surprise that came out of our application was that the chairperson of the commission invited us to formally engage with the evidence team, so the team responsible for leading all the evidence against the let's call it the alleged perpetrators of state corruption, which is a wonderful opportunity to engage with these people, to provide them with information that they might not have at their disposal. Because what I don't think it's necessary that people forget this, but what people don't realize is AfriForum was quite involved during these years with many of these sort of state capture allegations, because it was an active civil rights watchdog during this time. AfriForum, for example, assisted Paul O'Sullivan, the forensic investigator, where he was basically, the state tried to bury him in criminal cases. At a time, he had 8 active criminal cases pending against him, where the state were just trying on every single ground to get this guy behind bars, because they obviously did not appreciate the fact that he was uncovering state capture in the middle of state capture. So at some point, Paul O'Sullivan went to AfriForum and he said, listen, guys, I don't have the funds. I don't have the ability to defend myself in 8 criminal cases. Will you assist me? And AfriForum said, sure. And they offered legal services, and they paid for counsel in all 8 of the criminal cases. And so AfriForum's quite, aware of the extent of state capture during this time. It was not only Paul O'Sullivan, it was through its community structures. AfriForum was involved with various municipalities and corruption on that level. Through its involvement with state-owned enterprises like Eskom, they were really aware of what was going on during the time. So we think we have valuable, at least when I say we, I mean AfriForum has valuable information to provide to the commission. That's why we brought the application. And secondly, now that we have this open invitation to speak to the evidence leaders of the commission, we will be able to share this information to hopefully in the end of the day get South Africa, or at least paint an accurate picture of what transpired during the past decade, so that we give a true and honest account of the corruption at state level during the past 10 years.
Daniel, tell us how, in your objective point of view, I'm sure you will say, oh, we got exactly what we wanted with the time we had. We got great acknowledgements of the damage caused by cadre deployment. From a lot, not enough analysts, but some analysts, I think, and more people are realizing this. It's the policies and ideas that the government has implemented for the last 20 years will have an effect. This is how it plays out, that it informs what programs the government implements, how they interact with the private sector, what view they have of their own role, and how big they think that should be. So did you get, how was the sort of line of questioning, as it were, perceived perhaps by the government or other people who you interacted with at the commission? Was there any sort of acknowledgement that maybe in some slight way cadre deployment might be problematic? And it's not just a case of the specific people or names who were deployed. It's more about the idea itself, that this is sort of a policy that should be in place.
Yeah, it's the problem is not the specific people, it's the environment was created where these people were able to loot, steal, and corrupt state-owned enterprises. It's interesting that you asked this question, because I'm quite hesitant. Well, I'm used to, firstly, fighting losing cases. We have a saying in the firm, the art of a losing court case, and it's really a thing. Is you often go into litigation knowing that you'll have a tough time, but despite that fact, you still persist because there's a broader sort of campaigns issue to take on. So we knew that we're going to have a tough time, and you're always sort of aware of the political baggage. Nowadays every single organization is sort of labeled in some fashion, and we're aware of that political baggage. But we had quite less of a struggle at the commission, especially from Deputy Judge Chief Justice Zondo, when he realized we're not there for any funny reasons. We were there with good intentions, bona fides, trying to assist the commission. And the moment you go in with those good intentions, it changes the perception that people have about your client. And I think that's why we were as successful, or at least as successful as we could have hoped for. So in the end of the day, we're quite happy, we're quite chuffed. We think we achieved what we wanted to achieve. And I don't think there's an acknowledgement of the real problem, to be honest, at the commission. I think it's, it went wrong this time. I don't think but it's also not, it's not the place for the commission to sort of have an opinion about whether or not cadre deployment should have been in place or not. It's there to say, well, there were a set of rules and these rules were transgressed. Money was stolen and it wasn't supposed to be stolen. But hopefully this forms part of the broader debate regarding state-owned enterprises. It's the very nature of state-owned enterprises, the very nature of cadre deployment, and the very nature of this really massive state that we have in South Africa that's ripe for looting. And the point is, we have an environment where people are able to loot and steal. We have the environment where power is vested in a handful of people, and hopefully this commission and the work that the people are doing highlights that, and that we look beyond, just like you mentioned earlier, the individuals, the people in these in the past 10 years who stole, and we start to realize perhaps we should address the principle, perhaps we should address the environment that we create where people are enabled and able to do this.
If you're one of those people on the side of defending cadre deployment, just say this wasn't real cadre deployment. Cadre deployment
Yes.
hasn't been really tried yet, and then that sort of deals with the argument. I wanted to ask, and this is just something off the top of my head, but around whether there's any international precedent for this sort of commission. Has this kind of thing happened in other countries? I think for us who are here, and the work that we do, myself at the FMF, and a lot of work that you do for your clients, we read and consume so much of the news, so we maybe just lose sight of the fact that corruption only happens in South Africa, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. Yes. I think when you mix the state with the economy, you're going to create incentives for corruption. Yes. So has this sort of thing been tried anywhere else?
So I completely agree with you. I think it's not a question of South Africa being, particularly horrible at this governing thing. I would argue it's inherent to the nature of being human. People aren't perfect. People are broken, and it's just a natural consequence of that. There have been, I wouldn't necessarily call it similar inquiries, but there have been inquiries into corruption. I mean, it happens all over the world. What's interesting in our case, and I mentioned it earlier at the start of the program, is it's sort of it's substituting actual accountability. We have a process to deal with corruption. It's called criminal law, right? We have bodies who taxpayers fund to investigate corruption, to prosecute corruption, and we have a system to keep corrupt people outside of society. And here we're coming in and we're sort of trying to reinvent it. But I mean, it's obvious why this is happening. It's because there are people in power who don't want true accountability. They don't want the criminal justice system to go its course, because then people will actually end up in jail. So there have been similar inquiries, all over the world. People have tried to address corruption. We especially see these type of commissions where there's sort of a regime change, or there's a swap in power. Then people try to address the corruption of the past, or the corruption of the previous regime. But South Africa is quite unique, but it's not necessarily as unique in South Africa. I see where in South Africa, our government have two favorite things. It's a ministerial advisory committee, and then secondly, some form of inquiry headed by a former judge or a current judge. And I think it fulfills a symbolic role in the end of the day, trying to just calm people down, to say, look, we are addressing the issue. We did do something. We tried to hold people to account. But in the end of the day, the scope of this specific state capture inquiry is just too limited. They won't be able to they can't prosecute in the commission. They can't sentence people. They can't actually bind people to justice in the end of the day. But hopefully the prosecuting authority, from this, there flows a bunch of prosecutions, and we actually do see some form of justice.
I wanted to ask about the sort of defined powers of the commission, as it were, but you've touched on that. So the commission can't, for example, recommend to the constitutional court, to do X or Y. They can't, for example, tell the Minister of Police to go and arrest whomever. I mean, he'll go and arrest beachgoers regardless. He doesn't need a higher body to tell him to do that. But yeah, so if there's anything else you want to say just on the powers of the commission,
Well, I mean, the point is, like I said, they can't send anyone to prison. The end result of this commission is a report, right? It's
Right.
a piece of paper. It's going to be quite a thick piece of paper, but it's going to be a report, and it's going to sit on the desk of President Ramaphosa.
Mhm.
It's not going to be it's not going to be recommendations to the prosecuting authority in the end of the day. And if you're quite cynical, you can view it as, well, now President Ramaphosa has this massive document of findings by the commission, which he's able to use for his own political gain, or at least him and his allies' political gain. We're not sure. Perhaps it might be that the entire report is in the end of the day submitted and made public. The one advantage we obviously have, at least, is everything is televised. People can watch this. You can even today go on YouTube and watch the entire commission, every single hearing, every single evidence, piece of evidence that's been provided, or testimony that's been provided. So that at least is out in the open. But the connecting of the dots, that's not going to be. We don't know whether or not that will be made public in the end of the day.
From your reading of perhaps your time there, but also if you've watched any of the other presentations as well, I'm sure you don't have enough to keep you busy in your day job, so you just spend time watching all the presentations. But if I were to ask you to sort of predict what you think the report might say, kind of thing, do you foresee that the Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice will, that it's going to be very harsh on the governing party, on the state? Do you think it's going to be a bit more nuanced and a bit more middle of the road, a bit more centrist, as it were? What does your gut feeling tell you about what the report might look like?
I think it will sort of be quite centrist, quite middle of the road. I mean, we know everything, right? It's the media have reported on they've reported on the testimony before the commission, so it's not going to be something new. There's not going to be a big bombshell in it. I think what we don't know and what we're uncertain about is the recommendation that the Deputy Chief Justice will make in the end of the day. That's sort of going to be the kicker in the entire thing. But I don't expect it to be just we have enough evidence, prosecute the people, that's it, it's done, that's going to be the end of the road. I think it will linger. I think in the end of the day it's sort of just going to disappear, slowly fade away into our past, because I again, the reason this commission was set up was not necessarily to put people in jail. I think it was to try and say, well, we have addressed it, we acknowledge there were problems, but let's look forward, let's continue, let's build a South Africa. We even heard it last night with President Ramaphosa, where he it was the speech that where the most words were said, but nothing of real value was actually mentioned. And but he continuously spoke about building a better South Africa, making South Africa a good place for the people who live in it, and I think they're sort of going to take the same line with this. They're just going to say, we've done what we should have done, we'll put it behind us, let's look forward and actually try to achieve that new dawn that was promised just before the COVID pandemic struck.
Do you think, placing this sort of whole discussion in the context of the hollowing out of the SOEs and specifically the security cluster, so the state security agency, intelligence, one has seen the last few days just how much those agencies lack capacity, as it were, in terms of preventing wide-scale violence and looting, despite what is being said this morning at a media briefing, to which I've listened to some of that now, and about how they were prepared and they knew what they were doing. But at the end of the day, reality paints a grimmer picture than mere words. Do you think this sort of commission, that the work that the commission is doing and perhaps other things will help sort of strengthen these agencies again? Can we place it in that context of helping the state to build some capacity again? I mean, we talk about the developmental state. I think the state has sort of pushed South Africa's underdevelopment, as it were, the last 10 years. But just a little, I want to get your thoughts on how the commission could interact with other sort of state apparatus, as it were.
Well, I mean, you probably don't get a better example of how these institutions can be, I don't want to call it captured, but can be used for the people in power's own political ends, as the example of the public protector. We had a public protector where Thuli Madonsela was at the helm for what, 6 years, more than that, and it functioned relatively well. It sort of fulfilled its constitutional obligations. And before that, nobody knew about the public protector. I think if you ask the majority of South Africans, do they know who the public protector was before Thuli Madonsela? And I don't even think the entire 5% of the country would be able to tell you. But because Thuli Madonsela got there, she did quite a good job in actually doing what the public protector was supposed to do. In some instances, but perhaps even expanding the power of the public protector. It's something that's sort of a little pet peeve of me, because I think the Constitutional Court got it wrong in that famous case regarding the Nkandla report. But and then soon thereafter, when her term came to an end, we got a new public protector, Mkhwebane, in. It changed. It was a toothless organization. It didn't do what it was supposed to do, because the problem is how I see it in South Africa is the ANC view these various institutions as tools, to achieve their national democratic revolution, to try to cement power in their own hands in the end of the day. And it's the same with the SSA, it's the same with the police, it's the same with all the intelligence services in South Africa. The only thing that happened during the state capture period of South African history is we had a man who was able to really quickly garner support and tighten his grip of, and in the end of the day, infiltrate all these various organizations. We before this, we had a president, at least if starting from 1994, President Mandela was president for 5 years. He stopped. President Mbeki completed his first term for 5 years in 2004, and then he immediately started with his internal fighting with President Zuma, who at that time was deputy president. And he only had about a year or two, well, at least in 2007, when the ANC elected Zuma as leader of the party. But, there wasn't enough time. But Zuma had his entire 2 terms, well, not completely, or sort of was cut short a bit, but he managed to garner a lot of power in a very short amount of time and infiltrate these various organizations, and he used it to his own political gain, and that's why we saw this mass state capture and corruption in South Africa, is because he was able to centralize that power. But what we need to realize is it's not unique to President Zuma. It's unique to the ideology of the ANC. In the end of the day, it's unique to the view that there should be a strong centralized government that unifies, controls everything, and tries to manage an entire republic. So it's not about personalities. It's not about President Ramaphosa, President Zuma. It's about the creating an environment where these things are able to happen in the end of the day.
I wanted to, if you'll indulge me, discuss a bit more of a philosophical concept, but the application and the idea of the rule of law, it's thrown around very often. I mean, the president talked about it at length last night. He talked at length about many things and was light on actual detail. Unfortunately, the police minister will talk about the rule of law and people should adhere to it. What, in your view, is the rule of law and why is it so important? I mean, even from our perspective, we have a rule of law unit at the FMF. We believe that the rule of law is vital for any sort of prosperous society to have, for any society to have a real chance at prosperity. So what is it in your view, and do you see it being applied going forward in South Africa?
So it's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a lot during the past week. I mean, you can just imagine with what we're seeing, on our television sets, and all the other South Africans are seeing on their newly stolen television sets, that I think a lot about the rule of law and constitutionalism in South Africa, because people have written quite a lot about it during the past couple of days and weeks. And I think there needs to be quite a concerted effort to sort of demystify the rule of law and constitutionalism, and to in some extent try to point out that constitutionalism and the rule of law per se is not. People always say, well, it's this Western idea, it's a Western construct, which I get to a certain extent, because it most prominently arose in a bunch of Western countries during the past 100 years. But in its very essence, the idea of the rule of law is that no person is above the law. So it basically means that there's a consistent application of the societal norms and rules that governs that particular society. And that idea is not unique to Western societies, at least in my view. Our entire world and our history as a species is filled with examples where societies and groups of people, communities, follow a set of rules because they deem it necessary to follow those rules, because there's an advantage, a societal benefit to following those rules, to adhering to those rules. The question then just becomes, well, what is that set of rules, and whether or not those rules are good and create a prosperous society in the end of the day. So I don't agree with people who say, well, the rule of law is a Western idea and therefore it will never work in Africa. It's in the end of the day, it just means, well, will people adhere to the society's norms? And then the more important question, I think, becomes, well, what are those norms? What are those rules? And that's where the focus should really be. We need to create a set of rules that at least the majority of people are in agreement about, that the most people say and agree this is beneficial, this is good to build a society, and that people agree on those rules. And if that means that we can't get a majority of people in a country to agree on these rules, then perhaps it means, well, we need to rethink how we group these people, together. Perhaps we should think, well, should there not be more autonomy for a province to determine what these rules are? Should we not perhaps say that cities should be able to have more autonomy to decide what these rules are? Obviously, in the end of the day, still adhering to the very core principle that all people are equal. That's sort of the at the heart of the entire thing. But I do think we need to relook at how we approach this, because I'm concerned that we in South Africa we have this massive government trying to impose rules on a very big and diverse country in the end of the day, where I think communities and individuals on community level are better able to determine what rules would work for them specifically. So I mean, it's like you mentioned, it's a big philosophical question, and I think we can go on this topic for hours, and I really like this discussion. But the past 2 weeks has really highlighted I think firstly the necessity for the rule of law and for stringent adherence to the rule of law, but then secondly I think it has highlighted some weaknesses, because you can't say that everyone is equal before the law when we see people on our television sets running around looting places, and we know for a fact that the police and our criminal justice system does not have the power and the resources to actually hold these people to account. But then perhaps just as a last point to mention, I know people are quite despondent at the moment. We look at these scenes and we're frightened. But remember, it's not unique to South Africa. Last year we saw massive riots in a country like the United States. We see it in the UK. We see it all over the world. It's not a South African thing. It's a human thing. It's a part of being human, and unfortunately, not all people are, as I would say in Afrikaans, lekker people who won't pillage and riot and loot in the end of the day.
I think that's a very, very important point to make, and one shouldn't discount what effect it's had on people to be locked down for over a year and hearing at every corner, the vaccine program isn't going well. There aren't grants like there were, for example, in the US or the UK. So we lock people down and then we expect, oh, well, it's just going to be fine for the next 5 or 10 years. Things are just going to go okay. So it's confluence of factors, and that's obviously part of the work we try and do at the FMF, is to try and connect the dots, as it were, and help people to understand what's going on. Nothing happens in isolation, as it were.
I mean, I view this in a similar light as I view the 2008 xenophobic attacks we saw in South Africa. It's basically people responding to socioeconomic pressures. It's not. I know people they say it's the pro Zuma protest, but it's not. It's naked opportunism. In the end of the day, and it's sort of a snowball effect. I mean, you can't tell me that the thousands of people we're seeing on television sets are all acting, with one goal in mind. It's just ridiculous. All those individuals have different goals in mind, right? One person might loot a ShopRite because they legitimately have no food for that evening, and this is the best way to actually survive. Others are frustrated because they've been locked down for over a year. Others are, others are criminals, and they're using this as an opportunity. To try to paint a picture that there's this one size fits all reason why why this is happening is naive, and it's short sighted in the end of the day. But again, it comes back to that we want to be able to label people, put it into a box, because it's easier for us to digest. It's easier for us to understand. So we just say, it's all pro Zuma. Other people just say, it's all criminals. And it's not just one of those things. It's a variety of things, because in the end of the day, each and every person involved is an individual with their particular circumstances, with their particular things to deal with.
To go back to your previous, before this previous question, the second to previous one, and your answer, just about, I wanted to get your take on what would be your ideal constitutional or political dispensation, as it were. I mean, one can immediately think of something like federalism. You can think of the canton system. our current system, parliamentary majority, that kind of thing. I don't think you're going to tell me that you're a monarchist, but who knows what answer you're going to come up with. So anything you wanted to expound on in that area, if you were able to draw up a new dispensation, sort of in that way for South Africa, if you could.
I think that the problem is my idea is like one of 60 million and other ideas in South Africa, right? So if I come up with the solution that I think is great for me, I don't necessarily, I'm not guaranteed that the rest of the 60 million South Africans would necessarily agree. I think the time is ripe to have a look at electoral reform in South Africa. I think the time is right to reconsider the relationship between South Africans and the state, and I think it's becoming more and more clear. Every single day we realize that this isn't working. And the other thing that I'd really like people to think more about is the idea of a state shouldn't be as static as we envision it. I think we look at, we think about the USA and we think, oh, well, they have their constitution and it's almost 300 years old or more than 300 years old, and they've just stuck with that. But there have been constitutional amendments. The American society has changed during the past 300 years. Lo and behold, who would have guessed that societies actually change? And the same thing in South Africa is I would rather us, be anchored to a set of values that we agree with, values that are aligned with liberty and freedom and allowing people to prosper, and then changing sort of the formal framework as needed, right? But we have to have that core. And if we have that core, then we're able to change it. And the other thing is, I would argue that we can't have one solution, one constitutional framework for an entire country with 9 provinces, 11 official languages, millions of different people, and that there should be the devolution of power should include the ability for some people to a greater or lesser extent hand over power to whichever authority they'd like to hand over, or to take away some of that power to that authority. The point is, a government in the Western Cape is not going to look the same to a government in Limpopo. A government in the east of Pretoria is not going to look the same as a government in the middle of the Eastern Cape. And there should be that room to construct a framework that addresses all of the concerns, the various people's concerns. If I had to suggest like one approach to the entire country is I like personal responsibility and accountability, and that's why I quite enjoy the UK's model, where they have elected representatives that are from those communities. They're from those wards or districts or constituencies in the UK. And I think we should have a combination of that on the one hand, but not necessarily having those representatives represent people on a national level, but rather have that representation on a provincial level, and then from there they're delegated to a national legislative body. I think it's an approach that would work better, and it's sort of aligned with what we already see in our constitution. Is we have various functions that are already vested in provincial level. They are provincial competencies. I think that list can be expanded. The national list of competencies should be shrunk a bit, and then the provinces can have a bigger say, and that the provinces are then governed by a constituency basis.
Now, I wanted to ask you, and this isn't really part of the broader discussion, so I'm throwing a bit of a curveball at you, but again, this is why I recommend people go and subscribe and listen to Politique, because every week they cover the most pressing issues in the country, which range from economics to social issues to politics. So I'm sure Daniel will be more than capable to answer this. But looking forward to later this year, if we go ahead with the local government elections, how do you see it playing out, kind of thing? Can you gaze upon your crystal ball and tell us a bit about how that might shake out and possible implications thereof? If you tell us, for example, that the EFF is going to win the majority of provinces, how is it going to play out? What do you think?
So, the first question is when it's going to happen, when we'll actually see elections. And then the second thing is, how it will play out. I do think that these elections, they're going to be quite interesting. I think we're going to have a few curveballs here and there. What people need to realize is municipal elections tend to favor bigger parties. It's not people aren't as willing to give their vote to a smaller party in these type of elections. So we've seen traditionally that was where the DA did really well 5 years ago, is at this election, because they're big enough that people are willing to give them their vote, but they're not too small that people aren't. So I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see the DA stabilize in a way, and the DA is going to think, well, this is great. We've turned the corner. We're back, baby. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be because of a change within the DA. I think it's just purely going to be because of the nature of this election. I think the ANC is going to see a further decline. And I think there are going to be some interesting things happening in KwaZulu-Natal, because there's a bit of a power and leadership vacuum there at the moment. At the beginning of the year, the monarch, the head of the Zulu nation, passed away. Inkatha Freedom Party are sort of just drifting at the moment, and I think people in KwaZulu-Natal that usually voted ANC are disillusioned. So it's going to be interesting to see who fills that gap. Will people still vote for the ANC? Will there be will the vote shift to another place in KZN? I think that's going to be a very interesting part of the election to keep an eye out. And then obviously, I think all eyes will be focused on the metros. We're going to have a keen eye on Tshwane. We're going to watch Johannesburg, the Nelson Mandela Bay Metropolitan Municipality, and that's sort of where I think the most room is for a party to really make waves. So if I can perhaps summarize it in a nutshell, I think the DA will do better than they did in the national election. I think the ANC is going to continue to decline. Regarding the EFF, perhaps just to sort of deviate off topic, I think it's going to be really interesting to see if the EFF actually do win a municipality anywhere in South Africa, because I think they're quite scared of that happening, actually, because they don't have any management and administrative, experience. And it's one thing, to go to the municipal legislator or the provincial legislator in your red overalls and just complain about the state of affairs, and it's a different thing to actually govern, as the DA's learned during the past 5 years. So it's going to be interesting to see where they do actually, if they win a municipality, what they do with that power, and then how people respond to their governance of that particular municipality. And I think there's a chance of that perhaps happening in the election at the end of the year. But then perhaps as a last point to mention is, in South Africa, this type of electoral change happens incrementally. We're not going to see a big 10, 15 point a change in votes for different parties. It's going to sort of slowly but surely change, and then we're going to get to a day where power does eventually swap hands, and that's going to be a very crucial time, I think, for our democracy.
I wanted to get your quick thoughts. I mean, we've still got about 15 minutes left, so it doesn't have to be rapid fire questions, as it were, but just around the lockdown, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been involved in some cases around some of the regulations and the lockdown itself. I mean, I think it was yesterday, the state of disaster was extended again by another month, and as far as I know, this can be sort of done indefinitely. I did think last night, I was worried that the president might declare a state of emergency. And part of the sort of justification for that could obviously be the violence and the looting, but also COVID cases, and say, oh, the state isn't managing, this is a national health emergency, let's do a state of emergency with whatever minutiae that might involve. But just your thoughts on the lockdown. I'm guessing you will think it's going to last for much longer than I think a lot of us hope. But just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so our firm was quite involved with a bunch of cases. I think at the end of last year, I wrote a short blog for the firm's blog where we counted, I think, 23 different cases that the firm did, and it ranged from, reopening schools to exporting parrots to, the slow vaccination rates in South Africa. So it really was quite a wide variety of different cases for a wide variety of clients. My general, or perhaps let's start at the beginning. Your question regarding will it be extended? I think it will be extended. I think the only potential, I think there are two ways for the state of disaster to be stopped, or extension thereof to be stopped. The first one is by a court case, that they go in and people argue, which I think is a solid argument, that the state of disaster was declared in March last year, right? And there were certain circumstances that gave rise to, or at least informed the decision to enact a state of disaster. Those circumstances have now changed. We're not still in March 2020. So there's an argument to be made that you can't keep on extending the state of disaster based on the circumstances of more than a year ago. So that's the one potential way of the state of disaster stopping. The second one is that there's just no way for the ANC to extend it because people have been vaccinated, COVID cases have dropped, the mortality rates dropped, and there's no reason for us to still be in a state of disaster. And regarding, you mentioned that there was this fear that last night we might see a state of emergency. I just want to point out the difference between a state of disaster and a state of emergency, because I think there's a bit of confusion regarding that. So a state of emergency is a constitutional matter. So the Constitution enables national government to enact a state of disaster, and national government does that through Parliament. What we're seeing at the moment and how South Africa has been governed during the past 15 months is not a state of emergency. The ANC, I think, have very cleverly and specifically not gone that route where there's parliamentary oversight of the entire process. They went through the Disaster Management Act and they enacted a national state of disaster. And the problem with the DMA, the Disaster Management Act, is it does not place a limitation on the number of extensions of a state of disaster. There is currently a private members bill before Parliament, or it's going to serve before Parliament soon. I saw a copy of the bill yesterday, where they want to amend the DMA so that it includes a provision that the moment a state of disaster is declared by national government, that the relevant national or provincial legislator then has the power to determine whether or not it should be extended. Which is good because it just places an extra layer of oversight. At the moment, if you really look at it, the only person that needs to be convinced that the state of disaster should be extended is the Minister of COGTA. That's it, because the DMA allows for the relevant cabinet member, being the Minister of COGTA, to decide whether or not it should be extended. So I think it's a crucial amendment to the bill. I think. I don't think the ANC are going to be as amenable to amend it, specifically considering that the amendment bill is not coming from the ANC but from other parties. But it's a crucial bill because we don't want a repeat of what we've seen during the past 15 months in the end of the day. Chris, perhaps just remind me that I think there was a second or sort of an ancillary question that I might be missing now.
No, I think you've covered the broad scope of what I was looking at, and I'm glad that you sort of ended on that note, because a crucial point that I wanted to get your thoughts on is just possible amendments and changes to the Constitution coming forward. I mean, you'll be hopefully involved with a lot of this kind of thing. An obvious thing that one can think about is expropriation without compensation and amending Section 25 of the Constitution, but anything else that citizens should be aware of and comment on and advocate against that you think is on the horizon?
Yeah, so many things. I about more than a year ago, just before the COVID pandemic, I thought there were three. I thought it was EWC, the NHI, and prescribed assets. And now the ANC have decided to throw firearm ownership into that mix as well, which I think is absolutely crucial. I must say, I don't think these protests could have come at a better time to sort of show how important it is that South Africans who lawfully own firearms should be able to own firearms for self-defense reasons. So it is quite funny to me, to a certain extent, that we're seeing this rise at the moment. Given the fact that we're in the middle of a comment period for the amendment of the Firearms Control Act. So I think those four things, they threaten, fundamental principles that I think are very important. And perhaps a fifth one, which I'm not too concerned about because I think it will be stopped in the end of the day, but it pertains. So, I mean, if you just think about it, EWC is property, crucial principle. NHI is your healthcare and to an extent also your property because it's an expropriation of your medical aid for the state. Prescribed assets, again, your own money. Firearms is your right to life and to protect your liberty and property. And then the fifth one that is well, the comment period just ended, but there'll undoubtedly be more opportunities for comment, is the amendment to the PEPURA bill. And what that basically entails is government have proposed an amendment to the PEPURA bill. For those who don't know what the PEPURA bill is, it's the protection of the Promotion of Equality and Protection Against Unfair Discrimination Act. And it's a piece of legislation that regulates hate speech, discrimination, etc. And this amendment bill, the bill's already on our legislative books, but they've now proposed an amendment to allow for hate speech which isn't done intentionally. So for it entirely makes it subjective. So you can be guilty of hate speech whether or not you intended to, actually spread hate speech or not. So that's obviously quite concerning, is the fact that you can now, accidentally be found guilty of hate speech. And the bill places a bunch of obligations on organizations to have policies in place regarding hate speech. It is another administrative burden. Not only do you have to do your taxes, your municipal accounts and all those things, BEE compliance, now you also have to have this policy in place. So the PEPURA Amendment Bill really is crucial for freedom of speech, because in the end of the day, what it does is it enables people in authority to determine which speech is acceptable or not. And I would argue that's the fifth really crucial piece of legislation currently serving before our legislator that people need to comment on, people need to get involved, and people need to have their voices heard while they still can.
And then in terms of citizen activism and being participants in our constitutional dispensation, apart from becoming clients of your firm, what sort of advice would you have for people? You mentioned submissions, comments on certain bills, any other advocacy work that you would want to recommend, and organizations that you'd want to highlight?
You've given this wonderful opportunity where I can brag about all our fantastic clients. I mean, our firm does work for AfriForum, Solidarity, Dear South Africa. We've done some work for the IRR. We've even done some work for the FMF. We do work for Action Society, which is a gender-based violence or a civic group. So, I mean, all these organizations are excellent organizations to support, support financially and with participating in their campaigns. But even more importantly, and I really do think that all of these clients would agree with me and they won't mind me sort of trying to shift the limelight from them, is start in your own street, right? That's the biggest, most effective place where you can affect change. I always tell people, I think one of the biggest lie we tell children is you can change the world, not because it's not true, but because it makes children not think about their immediate surroundings. And that's the most important thing. I can tell you, we recently moved to a new house, and while I was there was the gate was open and there was a take-a-lot delivery van, and I was collecting these packages, and now the lady staying next door who I haven't met walked to me and she introduced herself, and she said to me, yeah, 2 years ago they all pulled together and they put in solar lights on the street lights. They replaced it themselves. They did it on their own. And I thought, well, that's amazing, because we're living in a town at the moment where the municipality is completely dysfunctional, and here 5 people put some money together, put in solar lights, and for the past 2-3 years they now have street lights that work permanently. And that's where you really start with change. Is start with your street. When you're done with your street, start with your neighborhood. Start with your local park. That's the best place to actually affect change. And then all the other things on the national scale, then you go and you support all these wonderful organizations that advocate for your freedom and your liberty.
No better note on which to end. So, Daniël, thank you very much for your time and your insights this morning. I've greatly enjoyed getting to talk to you.
Thank you, Chris. No, it was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed being here, and thank you to all the people who tuned in, and for the wonderful opportunity, and thank you for the excellent work that you guys at the FMF are doing and that you're doing with this show.
If those of you who are watching now and listening to this later, if you found value in this episode, please remember to like the video and also share it on your different social media platforms, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also recommend that you subscribe to Politiek. You can find them on YouTube. I'll link to their channel below, but you can also find them on all good podcast apps such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, etc., etc. I hope you all have a good day. Stay safe out there insofar as you can. Take care of yourselves, your families, and your communities. Protect your property as much as you can. We'll talk to you all again very soon. Until next time, take care.